Deltarune Chapter 5 has easily the best gameplay out of the 5 that have been released. Not only did Toby Fox give us 2 new soul modes in one chapter, but he gave us an entire platformer mode thanks to the petal feather. It controls amazingly, and there's even a whole new battle system for this. Now, I haven't properly programmed anything in a while, so I thought this was the perfect opportunity to try recreating Deltarune's platformer physics in Godot. My goal is to get the movement pretty much on par with the original, and create at least one battle with working acts. Surely it can't be that hard, right? I started by setting the project resolution to 640 by 480, which is how it is in Deltarune. Then I made a character controller that's around the same size as Chris, making sure to set the sprite scale to 2 times, since each pixel in the Dark World is actually double the size on the game canvas, making the game essentially 240p with extra details. Thanks to Ralze, we know that the jump height is pretty much exactly 3 tiles, so I began to mess with that value, as well as implementing some light acceleration. Once the movement felt decent, I extracted all of Chris's platformer sprites to make it easier to compare to the actual game. Now, my original plan was to make my own, legally distinct Chris by making them green or something, but I felt really bad for ruining these amazing sprites, so I decided to leave them as is. Just pretend this is Chris's evil twin Gris, I guess. Once I got the animations into Godot, I realized they were all aligned differently since I anchored them to the center and not somewhere like the bottom, which would make a lot more sense for this. Instead of finding a way to move the anchor to the bottom of the sprites, I instead chose to manually change the sprite offset in code whenever the animation switches. Definitely not the most elegant solution, but you'll never be able to notice when playing the game, and this is meant to be a small project, so I decided that it was probably okay. Probably. In terms of basic movement animations, Chris has an animation for being idle, running, returning to idle from a run, starting a jump or landing, jumping up, jumping down, and turning around. All of these together help to make the platforming feel extremely responsive and fun. After some trouble setting up the animations at the correct speed, it actually seems to be going pretty well. I didn't have the puffs of smoke or sound effects that the actual game has just yet, but it felt great to jump around. Speaking of jumping, I actually found out that while the actual game's movement feels super responsive thanks to the animations, you actually don't jump immediately, since Chris takes a frame or 2 to propel themselves off of the ground. I went back and implemented this as part of my state machine for jumping, and it feels a lot more accurate now. After this was ready, I decided to compare the 2 character controllers frame by frame, where I found that Deltarune snaps Chris to the ground before playing the landing animation. Mine currently just falls all the way to the ground first, which is a problem. At first, I thought I could add a raycast below Chris to solve this, so every time there was ground below, your gravity would increase so you land quicker. This caused some really buggy behavior though. I sadly couldn't come up with another solution for this because of how many edge cases you have to account for, but if anyone has any ideas, feel free to let me know. After that, I went ahead and implemented Coyote Time, which allows Chris to jump for a few frames after leaving the ground. Most platformers have this mechanic, since it makes certain jumps feel a lot more fair. While I was implementing this, I realized that the animation for stopping a run would sometimes get skipped and Chris would immediately start idling. But when I went to fix this, I found that the idle animation is misaligned with literally every other moving animation because of my terrible offset code. I tried moving the nodes around and disabling the centered mode on the sprite to fix this, but this just created other problems, so I decided I had to rethink my approach. Instead, I added an actual animation player node and set it up to do the offsets and flipping for every animation for both the right and left orientation on every single one. It took a very long time, but I think we finally have animations working properly. I think. The movement is still missing a few things, like snapping to platforms if your jump is close enough, but I wanted to take a bit of a break, so now it's time to implement slashing. If you tap Z in-game, Chris will swing their sword once, and if you hold Z, they'll swing 3 times in quick succession. This only applies to the ground though, since Chris has a different slash while airborne. After painstakingly setting up some more animations and the code to make sure they don't get cancelled out, I used the animation player to set 2 points where the code will check if you're still pressing Z. If not, you stop swinging as intended. Sort of. I also made it toggle on some area nodes when each slash happens, which I can use later to detect enemies or other objects to attack. For the air slash, I actually found animations for the same 3 slash system that the ground uses, but I'm 90% sure this is unused, since the last one is the only one that ever happens. Luckily, this did make air slashing a lot easier to implement, though apparently my animations are still messed up somehow. I'll just have to leave it like this since I don't have months for debugging like Toby Fox does. Anyways, I only have one last thing to implement before acts. In the actual game, if I press X and Z at the same time, the game knows to buffer either my jump or my sword slash. Currently, mine just doesn't do that. So I added 2 variables to track whether a jump or a slash is meant to happen, which makes sure that it happens as soon as possible. Now the 2 games are feeling pretty similar, minus the effects. I also found that trying to slash just before you hit the ground will buffer the slash and play the animation specifically for the 3rd swing, so it feels like a smoother transition. So I made sure to implement this too. At last, it's time for acting. I tragically don't have Snoozy or Rally implemented to follow the player, but I can still use them in the acts. Sort of. I had to finish this project before the end of June, and it was the 29th by this point, so this was the best I could do. I used Godot's built-in pausing to freeze all entities while C is being held. Then I let you select a target with the arrow keys, which is barely functional. The order it cycles in makes absolutely no sense because I didn't make it position-based, but it does work. Now the moment you let go of C, it runs an act. What a great act. That was actually fairly quick. Mainly because I skipped the difficult part of the code, but this means we can move on to the final mechanic. For my... I want to implement a working enemy, and who better than Mr. himself. I went ahead and extracted the coolest flowery sprite that isn't his battle pose, but while I was doing this, I discovered that his sprite from being sliced by the knight is called Not Feeling Too Great in the files, which is both hilarious and tragic. Poor Flowery.
They're eating my flesh!
While I was in Undertale Mod Tool, I also wanted to grab a tile set so the game looks less... Godot. Weirdly, I only found one tile set specifically made for the 2D mode, with the rest being the normal area tile sets. This might mean that the cool perspective shift is actually necessary for the tiles to work correctly, which would make a lot of sense from a game development standpoint, but I was not about to program an effect that complicated, having never written a shader before. In the end, I had to use this random flower castle tile set, and intentionally tile the entire map incorrectly since I have no idea how these tiles are meant to work. I don't even know where they're used. I also realized that even though I previously thought the game's tiles were 40 by 40, these tiles were actually 44 by 44, which slightly messed things up, but wasn't that hard to adapt to. After committing a few tiling crimes, the map looks like this. I should have stuck to the Godot tile set. Well, it's too late for that, so now that we have an absolutely disgusting map to move around in, I began to work on the Flowery encounter. I blacked out his sprite to make it look more like a generic bullet pattern encounter, then made some very simple code to make him move in random directions. Just in case he tries to leave through this convenient tunnel, I added a battle area that sends him back the other way if he tries to leave it. Next, I added an area node to trigger a battle by locking the camera and summoning my incredible battle UI. I gave Chris a flat 200 HP, and you take a hard-coded 20 damage for every hit you take, since I am not diving into Deltarune's stat system just to make some funny platforming. Once I set up the ability for Chris and Flowery to damage each other, I adapted the act object I made earlier to let you act on Flowery to deal 4 damage instead of 1, so it's basically a fake light buster with no cooldown. This is especially broken, since I didn't even give Flowery the ability to shoot bullets back at you, so he's really not going to be feeling too great after this one. We're basically just bullying him.
They're eating my flesh!
Now for the final touches. I wanted to add some of the sound effects from the actual game, but since I'm using Undertale Mod Tool on Linux, it's really broken, and I couldn't figure out how to extract the sounds since I can't even read what these options say. That just left me with one thing left: music. I set it up to play Sunset of Seven Suns outside of battle and Flower Man in battle, even though the music usually doesn't change for basic 2D encounters. Could you blame me for wanting to play this theme though? And with that, every mechanic I wanted to add has been implemented. in some way. Here's some extremely high-quality gameplay of Deltarune Episode 5. Okay, so the game sucks, but the physics are there. I'll admit that the act and battle systems were very rushed and poorly made to the point where I completely forgot to add the soul when acting or battling, but the systems do actually work. I mainly wanted to focus on the character controller with this project, which feels almost exactly like it does in Deltarune. While I am missing the smoke puffs and sound effects to really sell it, these two characters control almost identically at their core. Except I'm only just realizing I never added crouching. Because apparently you can crouch? Why? Like, seriously, what was the point? If for some weird reason you want to read my awful Undertale Switch statement level code, I put the Godot project on my GitHub. That will also be the only way to play this game, because I am not tarnishing my itch.io page with whatever this is supposed to be. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you're wondering when or what I'll upload next,
Get a chance.